But, you know, we can't stay stuck and neutral in this country. We've got to keep moving forward, like the emblems on our national crest, the kangaroo and the emu, they only go forward, and that can be the only plan for Australia. Sure, let's just move back from there.
Come on. Hey guys, I've just reseated that.
Yeah, please, off the thing.
Sorry, mate.
All good? That's all good. Thanks. Even as we stare down the COVID pandemic at home, we need to also prepare for a post-COVID world that is poorer, that is more dangerous, and that is more disorderly.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison rolled up his sleeve on Sunday to receive one of the first vaccines in the country. Earlier, he sat next to 84-year-old Jane Malishak, the first person among a handful of Australians being injected at a medical centre in Sydney. The two shared a funny moment as they attempted to hold up a V for vaccine hand gesture.
Okay,
for a couple.
how are you?
I'm only shaking your hand if you give more funding to our RFS. So many people here have lost their homes.
We need some beds.
We need more help.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and
A call for a permanent national fleet of firefighting aircraft has been rejected by the federal government in its response to the Bushfire Royal Commission. The government says it won't replicate what the states already have.
Expand our plans to acquire sophisticated maritime long-range missiles, air-launched strike and anti-ship weapons, as well as additional land-based weapons. That's right, that's what we're going to do.
What can you tell Australians about what your government is doing to mitigate or to plan for the long-term economic and environmental impacts of climate change over the generation as our children grow
Meet and beat our international commitments to reduce our emissions, because that's what a responsible country does.
Is that the only planning that the federal government's doing, just the climate policy settings as they are?
Well, our climate policy settings are to meet and beat our emissions reduction targets.
Mr. Speaker, this is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
It's coal. One of the first acts of the coalition government was to get rid of Labor's $1.8 billion FBT hit on the car industry and to scrap the carbon tax, which was estimated to add up to $400 to the cost of every single vehicle manufactured in Australia.
Oi, Scott, 400 times 0 is fucking 0. Like, we don't make cars anymore. Can we have the carbon tax back then or some shit? Like, the fuck are you bringing that up for? Like, oh yeah.
This Friday, many thousands of students across the country will go on strike from school, calling for emergency action on climate change. These brave and courageous kids are joining young people around the world who are angry at the failure of governments, including yours, to secure their future from global warming. Will you meet with and listen to these kids who are demanding action from your government to keep coal in the ground?
Mr. Speaker, climate change is a very real and serious issue which demands the attention of governments at all levels, and it has the attention of this government. But I'll tell you what we're also committed to. Kids should go to school. That's what we're committed to. We don't support the idea of kids not going to school to participate in things that can be dealt with outside of school. We do not support our schools being turned into parliaments, Mr. Speaker. What we want is more learning in schools and less activism in schools.
Today, here and in many cities across our country, women and men are gathering together in rallies, both large and small, to call for change and to act against violence directed towards women. It is good and right, Mr. Speaker, that so many are able to gather here in this way, whether in our capital or elsewhere, and to do so peacefully to express their concerns and their very genuine and real frustrations. This is a vibrant liberal democracy, Mr. Speaker. Not far from here, such marches, even now, are being met with bullets, but not here in this country, Mr. Speaker. Not here in this country.
This is a triumph of democracy when we see these things take place.
In Parliament that we had to listen to Brittany. I have listened to Brittany. Jenny and I spoke last night, and she said to me, you have to think about this as a father first. What would you want to happen if it were our girls? Jenny has a way of clarifying things, always has.
You said this conversation really hit home when you had it with Jenny. You thought about it as a husband and a father. Shouldn't you have thought about it as a human being? Well, what happens if men don't have a wife and children? Do they reach the same compassionate conclusion?
Well, look, in my own experience, being a husband and a father is central to me, my human being. So I just can't follow the question you're putting.
You didn't think yesterday, as a leader of this country, that it was foreign you had to take?
I did, and said so yesterday. I discussed it with Jenny, she had seen it, and we discussed it. That's how we deal with these things.
I've heard that women are overlooked, talked over by men, whether it's in boardrooms, in meeting rooms, in staff rooms, in media conferences, in cabinets, or anywhere else. Overlooked and treated like they have nothing valuable to contribute.
Ms Ruston, can I ask you, as a woman in the government, your reflections on the culture inside? Has it got better, worse, or no change since the bonk ban era?
Well, Phil, the only thing that I can...
How this ban is referred to, I think, is quite dismissive of the seriousness of the issue, Phil. And I would ask media to stop referring to it in that
We've
way.
seen countless statues pulled down around the world because of links to slavery. This is off the back of Black Lives Matter. In London, the mayor is saying that every monument is now up for review. And one of the statues in the UK with a question mark now is of Captain James Cook. How do you feel about the removal of these statues?
Well, when you're talking about someone like Captain James Cook, in his time, he was one of the most enlightened persons on these issues you could imagine. I mean, Australia, when it was founded as a settlement, as New South Wales, was on the basis that there'd be no slavery. And while slave ships continued to travel around the world, when Australia was established, yeah, sure, it was a pretty brutal settlement. My forefather and foremothers were on the first and second fleets. It was a pretty brutal place, but there was no slavery in Australia. So I think what we're seeing with some of these protests, they start on a fair point when they're raising issues about people's treatment in custody or things like that. Fair issue, but now it's...
And I say to them, don't go. Not because you shouldn't express your view. Find another way to express your view. It's a free country. People will make their protests and make their voices heard. And
being taken over by other much more politically driven left-wing agendas which are seeking to take advantage of these opportunities to push their political causes. And, I've always said we've got to be honest about our history. We've got to acknowledge the positive and the negative. But, I think we've also got to respect our history as well. And this is not a licence for people to just go nuts on this
And
stuff.
just in terms of your comments yesterday about Australia not having had slavery, do you regret those comments and do you accept that we have seen those actions here in Australia, that First Nations Australians have been very upset to hear you make those remarks?
I think anyone who's seen my commentary from the very first speech I made in this place, I've had an enduring and committed passion to closing the gap. One of the most important things that I've had the opportunity to participate in as a Member of Parliament was in those first few weeks when I was able to stand for the national apology. And this is the point about Australia. In Australia, we know we have had problems in our past. We have acknowledged those. And indeed, in our federal parliament, we have acknowledged those. I've always said we need to look at our history. The comments I was referring to was to how the New South Wales settlement was first established and the views that were communicated at the time in forming the New South Wales colony. And if you go back to people like William Wilberforce and others, they were very involved in that First Fleet expedition. And one of the principles was to be that Australia, or in that case New South Wales, was not to have lawful slavery. And that was indeed the case. There was not the laws that have ever approved of slavery in this country. So I don't intend to get into the history wars. My comments were not intended to give offence, and if they did, I deeply regret that and apologise for that. But this is not about getting into the history wars. I was simply trying to make the point that Australia, yes, we have had issues in our history. We have acknowledged them. I have acknowledged them. And we need to address them. And particularly those who I work closely with in this area would know that personally I have been heavily invested in these issues. And I will continue to be heavily invested in these issues, and I pay tribute to my predecessors as Prime Minister, because, you know, when you're Prime Minister, you know this is a responsibility that you have.
I had always taken a view about a formal apology, and that is that I wasn't willing to do it, not because I didn't understand that there'd been a lot of injustices, not because I didn't realise that they were a disadvantaged people, and they were and are, and that's a fact of life. I didn't accept the conclusion of the Bringing Them Home report that genocide had been practiced against the Indigenous people. I didn't believe genocide had taken place, and I still don't.
Has revealed that on the 26th of March 2019, your office asked Bridget McKenzie to seek your authority on projects to receive sports grants, and she wrote seeking that on the 10th of April. So why did you mislead the House of Representatives when you said that no authorisation was provided by you, and why did your office do that if you had no role in authorising them?
It's good to see that the Canberra Press Gallery is back to politics as usual with Parliament coming back. Yeah, thank you. I've answered your question. I said no.
Did you seek an invitation to the White House State Dinner for Brian Houston?
Well, I've known Brian for a long time, and Hillsong Church has a very big network of churches all across the United States. And their ministry, when it comes to their music and so many other things, have been a very big, it's probably the single largest church organisation that is known in the United States. And so Brian Houston actually turned up to the White House a few months later at the invitation directly of the White House. On that occasion, we put forward a number of names. I mean, that included Brian, but not everybody whose names were put forward were invited. But the point about this is, I mean, they're a very large church. I mean, they're well known in the United States. And a lot of people in the United States go along to their services every week. So I'm not quite sure what the accusation is about that.
Well, as I said, it was relevant because, as it turns out, he was under police investigation, and he still is, according to New South Wales Police. Would it be fair to say you weren't aware of that at the time?
No, they're not things I follow closely. All I know is that they're a very large and a very well-attended and well-supported organisation here in Australia.
Stop it. It's not sensible. It's not helpful.